Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. Today, Seth Pardo tells his story. You know how most leaders, mentors, or coaches share guidance from their academic knowledge or lived experiences? Well, Seth brings both to the table. He's been a professor and researcher and holds degrees from places you might have heard about, like Duke and Cornell. And as a trans man, Seth deeply understands how the external environment can profoundly impact one's life. Yet he has an unwavering commitment to fierce self-love and living life fully and unapologetically. Hey, Seth, how are you?
Amazing.
I love to hear that. Usually if I go out to restaurants and the waiter says, how you doing? I'll say, awesome. And they'll be like, oh, right. They don't know how to respond. So I'm glad you're amazing today.
People are not used to hearing others say, I'm actually amazing. I'm amazing. I love life. I love my life. There's nothing to really, I'm tremendously privileged and, spent a fair amount of time. We're going to get into some of this stuff. I spent a fair amount of time going through the dark night of the soul. So I really don't have, for even the small things that could irk me or whatever, life is good.
And so, Seth, I want to talk about, first of all, like, without being egotistical, I want to talk about my childhood first. So when I was a little kid, I was the fat kid. I was the one who was picked on. We didn't use the word bullying, but I was bullied as a kid. My childhood sucked. If I didn't have a great family, I don't know where I'd be today. Like if I didn't have a supportive mom and dad, and my mom always said to me growing up, I don't care what you do for a living as long as you're happy. They always had my back. And so I always feel extra sensitive to folks that are not only just dealing with to the exterior, it might seem like a minor issue being a fat kid in school, but in my life, it was hell. But when I look at other people that have gone through much, much worse, whether it's folks, dealing with gender issues or dealing with sexuality, I always double my sympathy because I always think like I was a real pain in the ass because I was a fat kid and people made fun of me, but I can't even imagine what people have real problems have to deal with. So would you mind just taking me back? I shared a little bit of myself there. You probably didn't need to hear about my fat kid stories, but like your childhood, what was it like and how were you able to get through that?
Oh, man. Well, first, major props to my folks. They had me when they were 24. So I remember when I was 24 and I remember thinking to myself, they're full on crazy. Having a kid at 24, I don't know whatever. They were eager and excited to be parents and they were the best parents that I could have asked for. So it was overall a really interesting childhood. I'm the first born of four. I have three younger brothers. And growing up, I grew up in Miami Beach, Florida, at a time when it was, there was some development, but it's not the way it is today. We could get on my bike and I could ride across town and it was gorgeous. It was hot, but, being on a bike and the wind in my face, like it was just really beautiful. I had friends who had little whalers. And so we, or a kayak, and we'd like get out on the water and go and find sandbars and get stuck for hours. And then, not be able to come home for a while and go snorkeling or, go searching under the water for various things. And I should have known that it would be a bit of a narrative from the life to come. Broadly, it was a fun time as a kid being a kid. I was born assigned female at birth. My life had a very interesting beginning as a gendered human. As a child, just as a regular kid, like outside of all the labels and everything, it was a beautiful time. And as a kid, where gender may not mean as much as, say, in adolescence, it was a beautiful time. It's like a really good time. I spent a lot of time with the trees. I spent a lot of time with the ocean. I spent a lot of time with my bike and going into lots where houses had been torn down. It was just dirt and like riding around in the dirt like a track kind of thing. It was a lot of fun. It was like my saving grace at a time that was otherwise really difficult. Growing up as a female-bodied kid in a world that really didn't understand, this is the 80s, right? So people didn't really understand trans identities the way they do today. The narrative around trans identities was that it was a mental illness then. And yeah, it's still in the DSM and such, but then it was like purely just in the medical model. There wasn't a whole lot of narrative around gender expansiveness or nonconformity even wasn't, they still had language around like tomboys and sissies then. So I was, a tomboy, one could say. And I loved to play sports with boys and have a great time. I had good friends, and those friends like got me. But making new friends was really tough because they judged me for, I would get the question, are you a boy or are you a girl? And it was the question I hated to answer. I just didn't want to have to answer it. So I kind of ignored it, go away. And, elementary school, they split you up by gender. Boys in this line, girls in that line. And I would always remember finding myself at the back of the line going, maybe I can just stand here at the back of the line and not have to choose. And then maybe we could just figure it out. And so that was really stressful in that sense.
It's so funny, Seth, when you bring that up, like you immediately put me in a time machine when you talked about like picking for sports. Again, being this athletic, chubby kid, as you can assume, I was always the last to be chosen. So that seemed hard enough, but then you're going through that. And I'm just curious, when did you, and I hate to use this terminology, but when did you think you were different than what was around you, what you had known? Was there like an aha moment? Did you read on something? When did you discover that something was just a little different?
I've been calling my memory for this question. Like, when did I know? I don't know exactly. As early as I can remember is the best answer that I can say. But broadly, I have a memory of seeing one of my younger brothers is 3 years younger than me. And we used to, when you're kids, you get bathed together and things like that. And I just remember thinking to myself, but we're the same. Why does his body look different? And someone would explain, you're a girl and he's a boy. But we do all the same things. And for all the things that I hear other people explain are associated with boys, that matches. Now, today, there's a lot more room for girls to do boy things and boys to do quote unquote, girl things. And there's just a lot more room to play in the gender expression realm. And so I can't answer the question, would my life have been different? Yes, my life would have been different if I were born, 10 years ago. But how much different? I don't know. All I can say is that in my mind, categorically, there was a 2-gender system and I fit into the boy category. Just looking at one body and looking at my body, and they were different. I remember standing on top of I would stand on the toilet seat so that I could pee into the toilet. I was like, wow. Why is this so hard? Why can my brother do it so much better than me? I don't know. These things feel a little different today talking about them than they did at the time, but it felt fundamental and existential at the time. Like, this is a big deal.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's funny too, because I think you're Gen X, right? You Gen X?
I'm right at the cusp. So I'm born in 1980.
Oh, okay. So I think you are on the cusp. So I always like to say that the Gen Xers, and not only because I'm one of them, is that we're the coolest generation because we got to live in a world before technology was so pervasive, and we were still young enough to catch up. Whereas the boomers were probably a little on the old side when technology and Web 2.0, Web 3.0 came around, that we were able to get a lot of it. And also in terms of like our mindset, in terms of how people are different. I mean, we're old enough to see, oh, wow, that we could form these thoughts in our brain that, oh, this totally makes sense. And so you bring up the point of like, if you were born 10 years later, because I always feel like I look back, and you know how sometimes you have that shame cycle that you have in your brain of you look back at all the stupid things you've done and said. And I admittedly say I've in the past, before I was educated and informed about trans issues, I used to say stupid things, just like a lot of people did. It was from an uneducated space. I just didn't know any better, but I had the self-awareness to be like, oh shit, I should learn more about this. I know Caitlyn Jenner is kind of a hot button issue, but I think the Caitlyn Jenner of it all really introduced it to the mainstream where folks could understand what was going on in that space. And we're not going to get into the Kardashian Jenner realm, but I think for a lot of people in the mainstream, that's where it popped, and it was easily consumable. It was everywhere. You could find out all about it. You have to go to the library to check out a book. You could see it with your own two eyes. So talk to me about your current state. I almost want to say you were lucky because you had a great family, you had great friends, and you hear this as well as I do. You probably hear more than I do. The fact that some people that are going through this transition, they don't have that safe home base. Do you ever sliding doors in and be like, Jesus, what if I didn't have my parents like that? What if I have those childhood friends? Because my God, to go through what folks have to go through today, it seems like there's a lot.
Yeah. One of the number one predictors of poor outcomes, mental health outcomes, emotional outcomes in youth is not having a supportive family. So family is huge, whether it's birth family or chosen family or adopted family, like somebody that takes you in, a guardian, or an adult who takes you in and says, I got your back. I will support your development. Let me, like all kids need is an opportunity to just self-explore and to play. And when gender expansive youth don't have the safety, emotional safety and physical safety to explore and be kids and play, and then the narratives that they learn very quickly from the environment around them about not being okay or something about me is wrong, those things stack up over time, and adolescence add up to, some pretty nasty critical self-talk. And that's brutal. In my experience, I never hid my differentness. I got teased a lot as a kid, but I also had such loving folks who were like, we didn't have it great all the time. My mom and I got into fights all the time about what I wanted to wear and what she wanted me to wear, what was okay and what was not okay. We've since repaired our relationship. And let me say, I'm a psychologist by training. So I have literally gone through a tremendous amount of training for emotional intelligence and how to have nonviolent communication and how to talk with people and make amends and have repair, emotional repair and psychological repair. So I've applied that in my own family system, and we've really repaired a lot of relational damage that happened when I was younger. And even still, I say I was lucky. The worst thing that happened was my parents and I would get into a fight about whether I could cut my hair short like a boy's haircut or whether I could wear boys' clothes to temple. Outside of that, I was allowed to wear sneakers and shorts and t-shirt, wherever else I wanted. I was lucky. And when I was 15, I was having a rough go of it. I remember I went to my parents and I was like, listen, something's up. I don't really understand it. I don't really know how to talk about it. I don't really have language for it. I've done a little bit of review. AOL had just come out. And so I did some searching online. And this was 1995, 94, 95. I did some searching online and I was like, there's this phenomena. And I knew that I'm an early researcher in training. I was typing in certain keywords and looking up certain things like girl who thinks they're a boy, whatever. And I found information and I said, there's this thing. I feel like I am in the wrong body. I've never met anybody else like me. I don't know if there's anybody else out there like me, but I can't be the only person who's like this. And I feel normal. I just don't understand why this is happening to me. Can you help me? My mom was like, she's a physician. And she's like, well, I don't know what to do about this, but let me see what I can do. Let me see what I can find. And I went about my day. I thought, is there something wrong with me? I don't feel like there's anything wrong with me. I feel just like a normal kid. Just this thing I don't understand. And so I come home and there's 3 books on my bed and a little sticky note. And she was like, honey, I'm sorry, this is all I could find. I went to the bookstore and I got everything that they had. And they had Young, Gay, and Proud, Hormones. It was Sheila Kirk's book, Hormones for the Female to Male Transsexual, and Cross-Dressing by Lou Sullivan, I think. Cross-dressing book, how to cross-dress for the female to male transsexual. And I was like, okay.
There's a lot of information.
There's something out there. I read these books by the end of the week, all of them. And I was like, okay, this is not about my sexuality. This is about my gender identity. And by that point, I was older. I was a mid-teen, right? So I was old enough. I could drive at this point. So I was old enough to understand these concepts. And I made a commitment to myself where I was going to learn everything that I could about this. I was like, I'm not the only one. There's others out there that are writing books about this thing. I'm going to learn everything that I can so that I know what I need to do. But I'm still learning. So I ended up going to school, getting a psychology degree. I ended up going to grad school. and I did, some pretty, what I feel is some pretty important research on this topic, on the process of understanding one's identity as a gender expansive human, and then ultimately doing a dissertation on how people process risk to make difficult medical decisions, and such as the decision to have surgery or to take hormones, things that have permanent changes to the body. How does one assess whether this is the right thing to do or not, and whether it's worth the risk or not? And I took it to the empirical world.
How were those? Because the lines must have been incredibly blurred, because most people that are in the world of science and academia, they're not studying something that's so incredibly close to them. You'll see some doctors who maybe been affected by cancer go into cancer research, but this was such a big part of your life that you were also making part of your professional life. Was there any struggle in terms of having you take yourself out of the conversation you're having in your head about whatever you're writing about, studying about, creating content about?
Yes, is the short answer. The more involved answer is that I was well into I had was basically defending my master's thesis by the time I had decided to do the medical transition. It took me a really long time, and when I said I was going to learn, I was really still processing information for myself, and so I was really approaching this question sort of as a stakeholder for others like me in that way. And with a decision like this, I was happy to have it in my own hands to say, well, using some of the existing models of development, is this a normative developmental process? And everything that I collected in the data suggested yes. And I was like, well, then why is it in the DSM? So I started presenting about it. I started writing about it. I started collecting more data about it. I started talking to people about it. And everybody around me were asking the same questions. And so we took those questions and we put them out there. We were learning how to do empirical research in grad school at the time. And so it was a perfect research question to go in there. Yeah, I had my own sort of developmental process where I was really preoccupied with what was I going to do. And this is a beautiful thing in my life where I got to learn a tremendous skill of doing empirical research in the psychological domain. I met amazing people. I became a part of a professional network of individuals that I still keep in touch with today, over 10 years later. And we're doing remarkable work. And that's not where my work ended. This question of who am I? And this question of how does somebody wrestle with the question of who they are? And how do they work through some of the edges that disturb them, that challenge them, they don't like about themselves? How do they find the through line of all the mess in the world while still being true and honorable and virtuous and loving to who they are? Because if we're going to create a world that we want to see with loving kindness and less war and more reciprocity and more ecological wellness surrounding us on this planet, it starts with us. We have to, I just went really big here, but legit, we have to know how to love ourselves for who we are before we can truly love another person, especially someone who transgresses us. And so I now understand in my mid-40s that these questions that I was pursuing were like ways to understand something much, much bigger, much, much bigger. And so now these days I am working towards other kinds of work, working towards being a life coach, working towards being a spiritual guide for people who are having in that dark night of the soul kind of thing, to really be able to sit with someone and say, yeah, it's hard not having the answers, but I couldn't possibly tell you what the right thing is for you to do. What I can do is say, I've been there. I was awake and I was aware and I was in it. I still have things in my life where that or I experience those same questions, but I don't shy away from them and I don't avoid them. I walk towards them. And I can teach other people how to strengthen their own sense of self and how to learn how to love themselves and all their edges so that they can walk towards the edge of what they think freaks them out the most in their life and be able to say, okay, I don't know what to do, but let me keep walking. Let me keep moving towards it.
When did you know that, man, I'm going to make a life out of academia? I'm gonna rack up all these shiny little pieces of paper that I could put up on my wall and pursue this education that puts you in a big sort of debt.
Yeah.
When did you realize that?
I went through school because it's what I thought I was supposed to do. And I wasn't sure what else I wanted to do. I got most of the way through college before I realized I needed any sort of research experience to go to grad school in research. I found my way like water meandering through rocks in a river without a whole lot of direct supervision or mentorship in college until my junior year. And when I finally I needed a code in order to register for classes, and I didn't have anybody to give me that code. And when I went to go get the code, the dean was like, "Where's your advisor?" I was like, "I don't have one." They were like, "What do you mean you don't have one?" And I mean, there's a sort of its own, I'll try to give you the brief version of it. One of my advisors had a really bad accident, an injury. That person ended up needing to take a sabbatical. And then the other person passed away part of the way through the year. And I think I slipped through the cracks or something. And so I didn't know that I needed the advisor in order to get the code. And so by the time I went to register for my classes junior year, I was like, what do I do? And so someone who I'd taken a course with said, "Come to my office, let's have a chat." And so we had a chat and he was like, "What do you want to do with your life?" I was like, "I don't know. I like psychology. I like people. I like learning about people." He's like, "Well, some of the two most common paths in psychology are clinical or research." I was like, "Well, I like them both." He's like, "Why don't you, if you're interested in research, you're going to have to get some research experience. Do you have any?" I was like, "No." So I went and worked with him in his research lab. I got to meet some of his graduate students and we were doing pain research. And it was the most fun thing ever. I enjoyed it so much and I was really good at it. I got to talk to people. I got to gather information. I got to learn how to analyze that information. Then I got to write it up. And I was like, wait, this is building knowledge. This is new. I like this. He's like, well, if you want to go to grad school for research, you're going to need at least 2 more years of experience. So I graduated from college. I still think about him every day. His name is Frank Keefe. I love that guy.
What a pivotal moment in your life. I mean, who knows? I hate to keep sliding doorsing it, but like, who knows if it did happen, you know, the unfortunate incident with the other advisors, that if this person didn't step up, where you would be today. I mean, obviously you probably would have been involved in academia somehow, but like this path, who knows, right?
You know, I applied to clinical psychology programs outside of college and I got rejected by every single one. And when I applied to grad school, I got rejected by every single one too, except for one. And it actually just takes somebody to say yes, right? Somebody who's willing to give you a chance. And so I never, ever, ever, ever forget the people who just gave me a chance to be me, to show what I was interested in, and who are interested and willing to nurture the minds of those who show passion, potential, and commitment. I was like, look, I'm not the smartest kid out here. I'm certainly not the most experienced, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to give it my all. And I will do everything that I can to learn, to grow, and to be the best version of myself in whatever it is that I'm doing. I mean, these days, when I get real, these days I'm really asking the question, it's pretty typical of, you know, a mid-40 something, to be like, what is it that I want to do next? What is it that I really want to do with my life? A lot of people, I don't know how many, I probably could look it up, but I wonder how many people get to this part of their life and they're like, is this really what I want to do forever? Some people are lucky enough to find themselves doing what they want to do forever. Great. My interests grow a lot. And I just am curious about what it is that I want to be doing next. And I just really love human beings, understanding how they work. That's pretty consistent over time. So looking for other ways to work more closely with people and learn from them and offer what I have to offer and teach what I have to teach and to enjoy this life. It's so brief and spectacular.
That's great. And and speaking of the current life and the current climate, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it's a lot different in the political climate. And I don't want to get too deep in the rabbit hole, but I always find it funny that a lot of conservative principles of Republicans is, and again, I'm not being anti-Republican here, but it's limited government, less taxes. That's always been the bedrock of Republicanism. But for some reason, over the last few years, they found it important for them to create these laws that no one asked for that affect the trans community. Just if you don't mind, if you don't mind talking about this, like, what does it feel like to you when you see a random law being put on the books in these states across the country? When and you think about where it's coming from. Like I said, it's folks that don't want to limit government, but then all of a sudden, hey, yeah, but we want limited government, but we want to add these laws too. So, what are your thoughts when it comes to that subject?
So many thoughts, so little time. Oh my God. Well, I'll separate my thoughts and my feelings. My thoughts are, this is bullying on a massive scale. Number one, this is a massive bullying campaign. I wish I understood sort of more of the root cause of why people think that this is necessary. Were they bullied so badly that they feel like the trans community is a segment of the population that is small enough and quote unquote weak enough that we can be bullied in this way? If that's true, then whoa, wake up, because our community is not small and our community is not silent and our community is very powerful. Very powerful, increasingly so. And maybe that's why. Because certain individuals know that society is changing. We're becoming more diverse. Thank goodness. And that scares people in power, because if they're not connected to the communities that are growing, they will not remain in power unless they create the circumstances to keep themselves in power. Not a politician, nor am I a political scientist. And so there's a lot I don't know about this, but that's kind of where my brain goes about it. Like, people want to have more status quo-ness. They want to stay, that's what I think. They want to stay in power, and so they start creating circumstances to keep themselves in such a state. Feeling-wise, emotion-wise, I'm angry. There are days where I feel scared, but again, I'm completely bubbled by the liberalism that is, here in San Francisco, Northern California. But I live here for a reason. There was a time after I left North Carolina where if somebody could have known my lived history, and if they had seen me in the bathroom that was of more appropriate representation for me, then I could have been arrested. That's ridiculous. It's insane, actually. It's insane. It's terrible. I wish that, to some extent, I wish that I could do more directly to make these changes, but I do respect that I just joined forces with a lot of the nonprofit organizations and political organizations that are aligned with my values, and I do what I can to support them, and I do what I can to show up and make my voice be heard where it counts.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned you're in North Carolina. I moved to South Carolina 4 years ago. Lived in New York, New Jersey my entire life, and coming down here, and this is kind of apples and oranges here, but every week they're passing a new law that makes it easier for people to carry guns. Like just last week, the governor signed into law like an open carry without a permit. So literally you could walk down the street in South Carolina without a permit for your gun. And the argument for the against, with these trans laws is they want to protect the children, right? That's the one note you always hear about. We want to put these laws into because we want to protect. But gun laws, we're not worried about protecting children then, because that's different, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But when you hear the argument of, oh no, we're not bullies, Seth, we're not against you, we're doing this to protect the children. What do you say to that?
Bullshit, complete bullshit. If someone is truly afraid, then I can understand them saying, I want to protect my child. But that fear is coming from a place of ignorance. So I don't understand, except for someone who says, I don't agree with that choice, or I don't agree because I don't understand, or for whatever, I don't know. I have definitely had conversations with folks who hold these views. And it's a difficult conversation. It's a necessary conversation. Because if we don't have these conversations, then we're never going to learn that there's nothing to be afraid of. At the heart of what I'm really sort of feeling into here is that people are afraid that children are going to be influenced or otherwise forcibly influenced or vicariously influenced. Really stretching my brain here to even try to stand in someone else's shoes for a second who thinks this way. I'm really having a hard time.
Seth, I think the thing is, you mentioned about having conversations. The conversations is important. I drive my wife crazy because we'll go into a party and she'll be like, please no politics. And, I'm down here in South Carolina where although we're a little blue dye in a red state, it's a lot of people with conservative views. And I say to her, hun, I want to know what they're feeling. I want to know what they say, because I want to be educated, for lack of a better word, on why they feel this way about a certain subject. If we can't have these kind of discussions, there's no way to move forward. Everyone just gets siloed out. Everyone just stays in their MSNBC bubble, their Fox News bubble, and then no one ever comes up with an agreement. So these conversations need to be taking place, and they can't just be done in the vacuum of decision makers or people who don't know what other people are feeling. Like you said, you're having trouble trying to put yourself in the position of this view, but at least you're trying. That's the problem. No one is trying to see what the other person is feeling or doing.
That is very true. That is very true. We have this problem with gender. We have this problem with race badly. How do we support housing for folks when, I'm changing the subject a little bit, but how do we support housing for folks if someone says, not in my backyard? What is it that we're protecting? Really? What is it that in the human family, what is it that's happening here that is preventing us from coming together? Is it that I want to feel more than? And so I look for somebody who has less than, and I position myself so that I can stay having more than? What am I afraid of? Am I afraid of not having what I need? Well, those two things being brought together are ridiculous. I put somebody else down because I'm afraid of not having what I have. One day, someone's going to take it from me. I would have to look it up to see who said it, but there's this. I heard about it in the context of the Holocaust, where someone says, well, they came for Joe because he was blah, blah, blah. But it had nothing to do with me, so I didn't say anything. But then they came for Jason. Well, because of blah, blah, blah. But it had nothing to do with me, so I didn't want any trouble. So I didn't say anything. But at some point, there's nobody left in the room to speak on your behalf, and then they come for you. And you're alone. So, to now get back into the broader political conversation that we find ourselves in, you and me here, that I think a lot of people are feeling alone. And I think that in that aloneness, they're looking around going, I'm going to protect me and mine because I don't feel like there's anybody out there speaking on my behalf. No kidding. Half of Washington, D.C., or all of Washington, D.C., I would argue, politicians are completely out of touch with the rest of the country. We don't see ourselves represented in our elected officials all over the place. And so we're like, who's speaking on my behalf? Who's looking out for my stuff? And those who do have the microphone are going to try to blanket what they want to see in the country to their own wishes. And this goes for either party. I have a hard time understanding that, like, if we have, reproductive freedom and gender expressive freedom in all of its ways, and sexual orientation freedom in all of its ways, how does that hurt family values in a conservative sense? Really? I don't understand. I wish I did. And I understand, closing their child's eyes. I don't want my child to see. Well, at some point, your child is going to grow up and get out into the rest of the world, and they may go anywhere in the world and learn that what they saw as children is not the full picture.
You talk about your dark night of the soul moment. If someone happens to pop on this podcast and listen to our ramblings and us going all over the place, and they're living that moment, whether it's gender, whether it's their sexuality, whether it's a problem that's going on in their life. What do you say to that person? Because I know that's what you want to do going forward. Like you didn't use the words, but midlife crisis, but I'll just say, like, you're in the middle of this point in your life where you want to, no matter what you do, you want to help people. But let's find a moment here and say, what do you say to that person who is having that dark night of soul moment?
You're worth it all. You're valued. You're loved. And even if it doesn't feel like it, because it's not coming from the outside, like, listen what's inside. Really. You're loved. And there might be a veil between that inside love for self and the talk, the chatter that goes on. But, like, you have this life, and it's a beautiful opportunity for learning and contributing. One of my teachers right now is Lama Rod Owens. He is a Buddhist practitioner. He's a Lama, a gay African-American man. He wrote most recently The New Saints. This guy knows what's going on. Lama Rod, if you're listening, you are a spectacular teacher for us all. And I learned from Lama Rod to love everybody, even if I don't understand, even if we have different views, and if they hurt my feelings, I'm going to go tend to those feelings. But when I'm done filling my cup back up and feeling resourced, I will return to offer love again. And if someone continues to hurt my feelings, well, maybe that's not the right person for me to really work with. I'll go somewhere else. So, because I'm not going to, continue to take the negative things from other people. But to the person who's really, hurting, the person who's really yearning for being seen, I see you. I love you. I see your potential. I think that we really need to do a better job of listening to each other. We need to do a better job of appreciating one another, even for all our limitations.
Well said. Seth, thank you so much for this conversation. We went all over the place, and
oh my God, what a hot mess!
I appreciate hanging out for the ride.
Yeah, wow. So, just broadly speaking, I have no idea. It feels vulnerable to say out loud in a recorded public sphere that I don't know as much about politics and perhaps political science as I wish I did. It's sort of not my area of expertise. And right now, politics is such a hot mess. These hot button topics are so all over the place and so messy. I have yet to figure out exactly what I have to contribute to the conversation. I'm not really sure that anything that I have to say about this is going to be worthwhile or meaningful contribution to the dialogue? I have no idea. My area of expertise is at the interpersonal level, is at my own like human beingness level, and maybe in small groups. And I know this much. I trust myself to walk into a room of different people, and I trust myself to be able to be willing to listen, to have the capacity to listen, and to be willing to ask hard questions that challenge some of those views, to consider something else. And talking about politics at the national level, at a policy level, for me feels a little too big, because there's no way one policy can meet the needs of all the different people that exist here. It's not possible. It's not possible. Best not to have it. But at a community level, even municipal might be too big, but at a community level, at a neighborhood level, listening sessions are hugely important. And then maybe inter-community listening sessions where we can really, truly take some time to hear each other out, not for any other reason than to take turns listening. We have really forgotten how to listen.
No doubt. Well, Seth, I mean, no matter what you choose to do next, I feel you'll continue to inspire and help steer people in the right direction, because that's all you can do. Just give them the information, share your feelings, and hope for the best. And I know it sounds optimistic, but I mean, that's just every fiber of my being. Just like I just hope for the best.
I really appreciate you asking these questions.
Thank you for answering them, because I know sometimes, I think that's the problem. And we got to wrap this up, but I think that's the problem. I think people are sometimes afraid to ask the questions. So I'm a little more, I'm not as risk averse when it comes to asking questions, but I think sometimes it's just asking. Just starting with an ask is a great place to start. So Seth, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And that's today's Good Listen. I'm Joe Pardavila. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila or TikTok at J Pardavila. If you want to reach out, feel free to shoot me an email at joepardavila@protonmail.com and tell me your story. And lastly, if you can please leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe, that would be awesome. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.